So if you check on your Python file, we define for every book. So we have the first book or the data 1, and then we have the second book or the data 2, and we have the third book. It is the data 3. And for every book, we are going to create a tree, and we are going to put the root. So what is the root? Here the root is books, and then we are going to put every book into the root. So it means every single book, it will be entered into the root, and you can see that every book now it has been settled with the title and the authors, and then the date and the publisher, and there are 2 authors and so on. So if it has multiple authors, we can set more than 2 authors, more than 1 authors. If this one, it has more than 1 authors. This one also has more than 1 authors. And for every of those data, we will put it into the tree, and we are writing. So we write into XML file. And the result of this XML file is like this one. So the first book is Python, and the author are John and Bob. And we have the publication date is 2013, and then the publisher is Springer. What about the second? This is the second book, and this is the third book. Okay. So this kind of design, it is just an example of the XML. Of course, there are many other kind of possible way to define book. For example, maybe this is the first book, and after you finish with the first book, you want to put the ending. Yeah, this is also possible. So you need to define your schema. Maybe this is the first book, and then after you have the first book, you will have the second book. Yeah, this kind of structure is also possible. Okay. So let me just delete this one. I think I just want to show the simplicity of this XML. Now, I have this XML file. It contains data. So it's similar with the database. And how if I want to read it? So this is the book data.xml, and I think you already do this one. Yeah, yesterday we already did the reformat. And after we reformat it, we can try to read it. So this is a reading XML.py. Reading XML.py. You can copy and paste this one. What is the meaning by reading? I have the data in the XML file, and I want to read the XML file. So this is only one example how to read the XML file using Python. First, I would like to use the element tree, which is based on the XML, and I will use it as ET. So it is like the short of this XML. And then I would like to pass the book data.xml into the variable tree. And I would like to get the root. So the important part whenever you read this kind of XML, you need to know what is the root. And after you know the root, you can check what are the elements after the root. I define this one because I already know the structure. So after the root, there will be sub-element, and after sub-elements, we need to check about the authors. So because the authors, there will be multiple authors. If there are multiple authors, if it is not authors, then you can just print the element and you can just print the value. But if it is authors, you need to do another for loop. So with this one, if you run the reading.xml, you can make some kind of description like this one. The title is Python and the author John and Bob, and the date is 2013 and publisher is Springer. So it means whenever we have data like what we did on the database, we can extract the data with SQL. Now our data is in XML. We can also extract the data with Python. As long as we know what is the root, what are the elements, and everything, if it is under the tag, then it is possible to be read with Python. Now I'm going to write a JSON file. I will use this code and let's make writing JSON.py under the same folder. So in order to create a JSON file, you need to understand what is the structure of the JSON. And in this case, I'm going to use one library in Python, which is JSON. It starts with data as blank. If you understand the data in the Python, we can use the curly bracket. This curly bracket means I want to create a new set or dictionary. After I have a new set or dictionary, now the first element, which is book, I'm going to put it as an empty list. And I'm going to create a new data. So I'm append. Append means I'm adding a new data. And what is the data? Because it is a type of dictionary, so I need to have key and value. Key, value, key and value. So the key is title and the value is Python. The key is authors, the value are John and Bob. The key is date and the value is 2013. The key is publisher and the value is Springer. And also the second book, we can do the same. And the third book, we can do also the same. And at the end, let's write. We are going to write the data. We are going to write the data and then we want to write it into the JSON format. So the file will be bookdata.json and W means we want to write. And the name will be out file because I'm going to create a new file. So the JSON will dump the data into the out file. So if you run this, writing JSON, you will see one new file, book data.json. And after you have the book data.json, you can open the file. Okay, so this format is not easy to read, so you can right click again, and then you can click the reformat code. So when you do the reformat code, it will be in a good structure. So the PyCharm already know the structure. So the structure is similar with the XML that we created. First we have book, and then we have the information about the book, the title, author, date, publisher, and so on. So the information is the same, but the structure are different. After you have the JSON format, of course, you understand when we deal with the information system, we need to have at least two kind of functions. First is write, and next is read. Okay? Write means we want to create, or we want to modify, or we want to do some insertion. Read means we want to access, we want to show, we want to extract, we want to select some data. So this is example about the reading the JSON format. Now you can copy and make a new file in the PyCharm, reading JSON. And based on this one, you need to look at the JSON structure. It means I need to know what are the key. In this case, it is obvious that the key is book, title, authors, date, publisher. Then I can define, first I will import the JSON, and then I will open the JSON file as JSON file, and I'm going to load the file. After I load the file, I will check the P is any data in the book, and then I will put it into every of the element. So I want to check the title, and then I'm going to print the value of the title. For the authors, I know there are multiple authors, so I will do a loop. For the date, I will just check the P, the key date, and then the publisher, I will just check the P and then the key publisher, and finish. So if you do this one, reading, so you will see there are 3 books. Python, John Bob 2013 Springer, and then you have information system, Andrew Martin 2014 Elsevier, and this is the 3rd book. So if you see based on those 2 examples, which one is better? Actually, there is no conclusion which one is better. Both of them are okay. And we can say that both of them are meta language. you can use XML. XML is a language that you use to create other languages. So for example, on the previous slide, we saw how to use XML to create a book language. So we have book, we have title, we have author, and so forth. In JSON is also a language that you use to create other languages. So it's similar. If you know that books contain book title, authors, and publication, publisher, date. So we need to understand those structures, and then we try to create it. When you have XML, it means you need to create a kind of tree. So the tree is something like this one. I have a book, and I have the attribute. What is the attribute? Title, authors, date, and publisher. And then for the title, I have what is the book title. And then for the author, if there are multiple authors, we can see something like this, multiple authors. If date is only one, and then publisher is only one, then this is the tree. And what we learned before is to create the XML based on this kind of tree. In JSON, it is also a tree, but the tree is more like simple, because when you have like multiple values, for example, the authors, we do not need to split. In XML, you need to split, but in JSON, we can just use array. Or in this case, if it is in the Python, you can use list. So the tree has a little bit different structure between XML and JSON, especially if there are multiple values. The tree is a data structure. So if you learn the data structures and algorithms, we have some section about tree, and it has been studied by the computer scientists and the mathematicians. And there are many well-known algorithms for processing and the traversing. The traversing means if I have the tree, which node that I visit the first time. So XML and JSON are able to leverage this. So in the function of XML and JSON, they already have the function for processing and the traversing. And tree can be used for the data as well as the schema. As you know, the database, the DB, has schema. When you create your ERD, the entity relationship diagram, it is the schema. You want to create the schema so you can see the relationship between entity. It is also the same with the XML and JSON. We can also make the schema with XML and JSON. So schema represents the structure of the data. XML schema show the structure of the data in the XML format, and the JSON schema display the structure of the data in the JSON format. So they have their own way to define the schema. For example, this one. This is the XML schema. The XML schema is similar what you already learned in the Django about models.py. Okay. When you create the models, you need to create the class, and then you need to create the attribute, how many attributes you have. And for each attribute, you need to define what is the data type. If it is a character, you need to define a character. If you think that it is an integer, you will give the data type as integer. And this is also the same. This is the definition of the book. You will see that the first, XS, it means it is the XML schema. And then I have one element, and the element name is book. This XML schema is a complex type, and if you can see, there is a pair. If there is an opening, then there will be an ending. So this is the same like what we learned about HTML, but now it is related to the schema and particularly for XML. And they already have the definition about the element, the complex type, and sequence. So the sequence is about what is the first element and what is the next element. So I know that the first element will be the title. Name is the title, and the type. What is the type? The type is string. So it means any character. And then I have another element with name is authors. Again, I will have a complex type, and then I have defined a sequence because there can be multiple authors. So authors, there can be maximum 5. Okay. So this is the definition in the schema, and then the data type will be string. What about the date? Okay, the date is only just date, and then we can just put year. And then the publisher, the minimum occurrence 0, means if you do not have any publishers, no problem. Let's say I want to put the publisher with selection. I want to recommend only books that has been published in Springer or MIT Press or Harvard Press. Then I can put this kind of restriction. If you don't have this simple type of restriction, it means every publisher is possible. But if you have this simple, if you have this restriction, then your publisher will be limited only this value. And the remaining is only the closing. So we call this is the XML schema to create the data for book. What about the JSON schema? So the JSON schema, we use the idea of the dictionary. In Python, we know the dictionary, and then we use the JSON schema. And then we want to create an object, and there are some properties that we want to check. This one is book. Okay, the type is object. And what are the properties? We will have title, authors, date, and publisher. And the title type is string. The author's type will be an array. And the minimum item is 1, the maximum item is 5. And for each item, the type will be string. The date is a string, and the pattern will be like this one. So this is what we call as the regular expression. If you learn about the text mining, this is the regular expression. And then we want to create like this one. I want to have only a value of number. Okay. digit between 0 until 9, and the number will be 4 number or 4 digits. We know that the date, which is year, it will be 4 digits. For example, 1945. Then 4 digits of year. Okay. Publisher, it will be a string, and okay, we can limit the options into as Springer, MIT Press, and Harvard. And this one, required. So we can specify that the title and the authors and date are required. So it should have one value. But for the publisher, it is not required. Additional property, false. It means I cannot have more properties. So I just stop into these 4 attributes: title, authors, date, and publisher. So this is recorded with this property. What about the book? So I need to also give a book as required, because if there is no book, then of course the data will not be available. And the addition properties is false. The title with the string, so it's similar with the XML. In XML, you need to define the XS element name title and the type is X string. But in the JSON, you can just define title and the type is string. If you use the XML, you need to define every of the element, like this one with an array, with a complex type. But in the JSON, you can just define an array. And if you are dealing with the date, in XML, they have a particular format, which is only defining year. But in the JSON, you need to define with a kind of pattern with a regular expression. And for the publisher, you can just use a function enum to limit the selection. But when you are doing with the XML, you need to give this restriction. So those two are the difference between the XML and the JSON schema. This is obvious. Okay, when you are dealing with the XML schema, it will be written in the XML, and when you do with the JSON schema, it is written in the JSON format. Nowadays, there are many tools that provide the conversion between the JSON to XML or XML to JSON. So we can see, for example, this free formatter. This is a tool for the developers. So if you are a developer, of course, you can understand some of these things like JSON formatter, HTML formatter, XML formatter, SQL formatter. So until now, we learn about HTML and you learn about SQL. And in this period, you learn about JSON and XML. And there are some validator. The validator means we want to check whether the language is valid or not. So they want to check whether the opening and the ending exist or not. And you can take a look on this free formatter. And what I want to explain is this one. So there is a converter. You can convert your XML to JSON, or you can convert from JSON to XML. So just let's see one example. Okay. Of course, it depends on your XML format. Let's say I'm going to change this XML format into JSON. Book ID equals to MACD. Oh, no, not MACD. MCD. Sorry, I cannot say any brand. So this is MCD. The title is Modern Compiler Design, and the author is Dick Grun and the publisher is Springer. So I will copy this one, and if you copy and paste your XML here, you can press Convert XML to JSON. Then it will show you what is the possible JSON format. So in this case, I can say that both XML and JSON, they are interchangeable. So you can use both of them. You can select XML or you can select the JSON depending on your understanding and your convenience. But as I mentioned to you in the first part of this slide, JSON becomes more like a trend in the Stack Overflow. So people try to use JSON more rather than XML. And if you choose this one, you can define the properties like this ID of the book. But when you are doing with the JSON, usually some kind of ID, it will start with @ So @ means this is just to represent this is a key, or this is one of the attribute. Okay. So that's all about the XML and JSON. Why I need to explain the XML and JSON? Because it will be a part of this Django REST framework. When we are dealing with the web, we need to understand the idea of the REST framework, because nowadays there are many webs and they use REST framework. And in the REST framework, they will use JSON. So we can see, before I explain the JSON or the REST framework, I would like to start with the explanation about API. What is API? API is an application programming interface, and this kind of programming interface is a method to communicate between one site to another site, or one component to another component. A set of clearly defined methods of communication among various components. So if I want to communicate from my computer here to my computer in, for example, in my office, I can set up an API to get some data in my computer, because it is a kind of interface. There are some methods in the API. We can get, we can set, we can create, and so on. So it's like the SQL. In SQL, we can get the data, or we can set, we can create, we can modify, and etc. And it is more about the communication. If you deal with a kind of company server, or if you deal with the company computers, you cannot get access to the computer. Instead of the computer, you can just have the API. There are two kinds of mechanism. The first is service-oriented architecture. Service-oriented architecture means, it is based on the service. But the other type of communication is ROA, which is resource-oriented architecture. So for the data exchange, it requires a protocol. We call it a protocol. So there are two protocols, two important protocols. Actually, nowadays there are also other kind of protocols, but we will just learn these two protocols. First is SOAP, or we call it SOAP, and the other is REST, or we call it REST. The SOAP is Simple Object Access Protocol. That's why they call it SOAP. It is a messaging protocol specification for exchanging structured information in the implementation of web services in a computer network. There's another protocol, we call it REST, R-E-S-T. It is representational state transfer. And it is a term coined by one person named Roy Fielding to describe the architectural style of the network system. Okay, so note that the API is the application programming interface. It is not related with the protocol. There can be many kind of API. For example, the private API. The private API is the API for the internal company. This is for private use. There can be a partner API. The partner API is only for specific business partners that can use the API. I give example, this one is Uber Eats, okay, because I'm using some of this API. It is from Uber. And in Korea, there are also other API, Naver API, Kakao API, okay, and also the API from the online stores, Kupang API. Okay. So they provide the API for business partners. And we can also have the public API. Public API means the API is available for the use of public. So Google Books, they provide some public API. If you want to take a look on some public API, yeah, those are the public API. Let's say I want to see the animals. So by using this API, adopt a pet, then yeah, you need to define what is the key, what is the version, and so on. And you will see information about pet in this website. So if I remove this one, because it is related with the public API, this website is about adopting pet. And if you want to check for a specific pet, then yeah, you can access this API. And so on. So you can see there are many kind of websites that provide the public API. Transportation, usually it is the most common one. For example, the aviation or some kind of navigation, they will apply those kind of API in order to check whether the traffic is good, the traffic is bad, and etc. Okay, I think I will stop for this one.